I feel like I almost don't have to introduce myself just because I know about half my team's here in the audience, so it won't be anything new to them, but that's okay. We'll still go through some introductions. So, my name's Michael Allred. I'm the Director of Identity and Access Management with a company called Intermountain Health. We're a not-for-profit organization out of Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm going to talk about just enterprise identity and access management, a little bit about our philosophy of continuous next to improve our identity systems. Skip through that. So let me just give a brief overview of Intermountain Health. We offer health services now in 7 states, 33 hospitals, including a virtual one, 4,700 beds, a bunch of clinics, 3,800 physicians, and 60,000 basically what we call caregivers. That's our internal employees. We call caregivers, and we provide health coverage for insurance for over 1 million members through our Select Health program. And we are, with a recent acquisition, we're now in 7 states. So they kind of say all the way from Mexico to Canada in the Intermountain West. We have hospitals, facilities, air bases for our transport services, as you can see, just kind of all focused in that central Intermountain region with our different acquisitions. So let's talk about IAM 3.0 modernization. So as we started our journey, we've had an identity program for a long time. As we started our journey down the path of enhancing our identity program, had outside consultants come in and they kind of laid out some things that we needed to do. And that was kind of what I call IAM 2.0, was kind of moving from old internal built systems, old technology, and so this is when we brought in our IGA tool, brought in some better federation tools, single sign-on tools. So we brought in a bunch of tools in for IAM 2.0. Several years ago, we stepped back again and said, gosh, how do we, now as the company kind of started this grow through mergers and acquisitions, how do we grow now? What do we need to do to grow from just this Salt Lake City, Utah-based company to this larger Intermountain West company? So we kind of started the modernization and really, laid out some things that we want to change, we want to grow, we want to continue to get better and enhance our capability for identity. And so these are kind of some of the things we laid out of what would a more modern identity program be able to do. Again, decommission old technology. I think all of us have to deal with that, whether it's just stuff that has aged or it's stuff you've built. We want to be able to federate our identity services to new platform or new M&As, partners, clinics, all of that. We want to continue to expand, enable our role-based access, kind of move to a DevOps model of quicker, faster, more agile, dramatically enhance our privileged access protection, mature our risk identity proofing. So we really kind of laid out these are things we want to do as part of our modernization 3.0 project. What were the business drivers behind all this? Again, ability to move quickly. I think all of you probably run into this nowadays where your business just wants to move quicker and quicker, and they don't want to wait around for identity systems or IT in general to slowly get to things, especially as we moved into this merger and acquisition phase that we hadn't previously been in. We started buying up clinics in different states and hospitals, and finally have recently done a pretty big merger with a company. But so how do we move fast? And our first few M&As were a little shaky. We wrote playbooks. We kind of expanded on that as we got better at it. And luckily, we've always had support from an identity program to get involved early in the M&A. I hear a lot of people, hey, we don't know there's an M&A coming until they announce it on the news type of thing. We've been semi-lucky to get downstream from that so that we can have day one services going. How do we improve automation, self-service? These are kind of the things that businesses were telling us. Enhance our security posture. Reduce drag on the business is a big thing. How do you get that day one ready to work? Reduce the security risk from failures to terminate timely access. And one of the big things they kept telling, my boss on up the chain is, we've got to make things simpler. We've got to reduce complexity. We've got to get rid of products. We got to make this whole identity program less likely to break, less fragile, move faster, and just the best way to do that is get rid of duplications, reduce complexity, and consolidate applications and vendors. So that's kind of the business driver. So kind of laying out a little bit of what some of this look like from business drivers from the business acquiring. So we kind of broke things into small acquisitions at 300 to 3,000 employees. Had some playbooks around that, because we would look at playbooks for an acquisition. Buying a couple clinics with a few hundred employees is way different than a larger 10,000 employee company. A lot of that is the maturity of the company. They just don't have the stuff, the infrastructure in place, the teams in place, the procedures in place to do things. We said, okay, 300 to 3,000 is kind of a small. In between 3 and 10 is a mid-sized acquisition. 10,000 plus is a large acquisition or merger. And then what are the day one requirements? In almost all cases, M365, Teams, collaboration was a big thing on day one. And so we needed to be able to quickly bring in, get people into Microsoft, no matter what platform they were previously using. Get them in, get them on Teams, get them being able to communicate, especially at the high level, share documents, do all those things for the business, and really just improve that onboarding experience. How do you move faster, easier, more agile? How do you improve all that? And then reduce rework from duplicate matching. I don't know if I'll have time to talk about that. We'll see how that goes. So what are the technical challenges we run into? I'll run into these all the time, but as we were trying to modernize and meet the business needs, outdated, unsupported technology. So we had a lot of stuff out there that just wasn't up to the task. And so finding new tools, developing new tools, and really getting tools that work together and play together. Identity matching in our old tool it continues to be an issue, but it's real poor. So we get a lot of duplicates. If you're in the identity space, you know the issue with duplicates, right? You got multiple source systems. And in healthcare, it's particularly a challenge, because we'll have a student system and a credentialing system and a affiliate provider system. You got all these different systems. They don't come out of your HR system. That's only employees. As we work with their HR team, they're always like, hey, if we don't pay them, we don't want them in our system. And so you got to pull all those systems somehow into a central repository to provision, get them onboarded, and so you get students who then turn into employees. You end up with two Bob Joneses, or one Robert Jones and one Bob Jones. How do you know they're the same? So duplicate matching was an issue. Duplicate accounts were created between source systems. Again, reducing that complexity. And we still do, but we have lots of custom-built scripts, services, all this back-end stuff that 15 years of an identity program just creates over time. Got smart people, love to write scripts, solve a problem. How do we kind of eliminate a lot of these custom processes and move to vendor-based stuff? And then what is understanding the ramification of process change, fears, different teams, not, hey, we've always done it this way. Why are you getting rid of that system? Or we've always used this tool. We don't like the new tool. All those type of things. Technical challenges of the tool didn't do what the old tool did. Some other business challenges we had: identity services run or supported by other teams. So when we got a new CISO, my new boss came in, he said, you call yourself the identity and access management team, but you got identities getting created over here, and you got access getting created over there, neither one on your team. So we've been working to consolidate business functions, and so that our team is the identity and access management team. So we didn't own the full life cycle. And then one of the biggest business challenges, keep things running while you transition to new technology, right? I think we've all experienced that. How do you swap out an underlying architecture like identity, but keep everything running while you're doing that? And it's a challenge. It's a challenge we continue to work on. Lots of interfaces, connections going on in the background. And as you get into it, you say, well, if I pull this out of here, it breaks that over there. If I plug this in here, it breaks that over there. So how do you keep that running, keep the business running while you really replace the core underlying identity platform? So along came a project that we called Project Pyramid. One of our project managers happened to see at the time this is an older logo from Radiant Logic, so I'll still use it though. Happened to see that and said, well, this is Project Pyramid. And I said, okay. So I kind of got tagged Project Pyramid. Got to have a good code name. And this was really our modernization. So we had Radiant Logic for a couple of small M&As that we had in. And as we looked at that tool, we said, gosh, this will really create that identity fabric, that identity store, that core underlying identity platform that allow us to bring in these different sources all into one platform. So it replaced old technology stack that was in place. We had something called the Master Service Provider Repository, old tuxedo-based system, really pretty innovative 20 years ago, but just was not handling what we needed to do, especially as we grow through M&As, and so we no longer have those set sources. One thing you see with M&As is, you build up your connections, whether it's to your IGA tool or some other source, to your other, to your HR system or a student system, whatever it is you're connecting to. Well, then along comes an M&A who has a totally different HR system, has a totally different, student system, has manual processes, has other things that you've solved, but they're not going to use your system yet. And so how do you pull those into a central repository? And then some of the things we want to do is change the authoritative source from this old repository to the new Radiant Logic directory, and basically copying source systems into the aged app stores and be able to create this one identity. So what are we trying to do with this? Trying to federate identity services. So as we go out and acquire a new company, we want to be able to go out, grab their Active Directory, and make available day one services for this new acquisition, independent of the size of that acquisition. Want to virtualize their directories and ultimately get to creating a global identity, a global profile. So we've had for a number of years what we call the one Intermountain identity. The idea is I should have one user ID and password, and we've had something similar in place for years, but this was kind of taking it to the next level of really pulling in all that identity data and create a global profile for you with kind of some multiple personas, because in healthcare you have interesting things where a doctor might work his shift during the day, but on the weekends works in the emergency department, or nurses float around. People pick up shifts at different places. In the morning, I'm a nurse. In the afternoon, I'm a registrar. So how do we create that global identity profile with enough information about you for your other jobs, your other services, those type of things? And then how do we get better at performing duplicate matching? Anytime you have multiple sources, student system comes in as Bob, Bob Smith. You go to HR, you get your legal name, Robert Smith. It comes through the system. It sees it as two different people because your name doesn't match. And a lot of times students don't give you a date of birth, social, all the things that you're used to matching on. They just, especially vendors, providers, they don't always, HR can force you to give that information. Nobody else can. And so you end up with a lot of duplicates. So we've been working on how do we do better duplicate matching to roll up all those sources into one person, one identity in the organization. So this is kind of our setup. So we have this federated identity services set up there that virtualizes those directories, pulls them all into this one authoritative directory, one meta directory with all this data, and allows us to quickly, we have LDAP directories, we have an M&A domain, an Active Directory domain, and we're quickly able to pull all those into one source. And then sitting on top of that is our authentication federation, SAML, OAuth type system that then allows us to get this M&A or all these different people into one Microsoft, ServiceNow, whatever that enterprise application is, we're pulling out of that one directory. So the application's simplified. It's simply calling your federation services and authenticating, and then the federation services calls Radiant. And in our case, we still have some calling some different directory to get attributes, but over time, this will be the idea that we'll have one federated system that our authentication source can pull against and authenticate you into multiple systems. So if you have a AD group that you need to send to an application, if you have some access list you can pull up and send to an application, all through your federation, through your SAML assertion, you can actually pull the data. And the other thing this has allowed us to do is from these M&A directories, they don't have to know what this corporate account is, right? So we have these corporate accounts, but they can log in with what we call a market account. So they can log in with the user ID and password they already know, and that's all rolled up into the virtual directory layer. And so when they authenticate to that, it says, oh, okay, I know they're logging in out of this directory, but I need data out of over there. I pull that together, send up to the service, so the user has a better experience. They don't have to go out, claim their corporate account yet. We can get them on day one without a lot of communications to them about what they need to do, how to activate, and get their stuff going. So this is kind of, we're still building a lot of this, but this is kind of where we're going. A lot of this is in place and working well. Always challenges, but overall working really well. So one of the things that comes up quickly in this discussion is, what's the difference between kind of this virtual identity structure and your identity governance tool, right? So how do they overlap? What tool does what? We still have debates internally about this, of what tool does what, because there is some overlapping systems. Governance tools are good at access requests, approvals, role management. They're good at certifications, kind of the joiner, movers, leavers process. The federated identity systems are good at that virtualization, pulling all those sources together, doing the matching, actually making your governance tool a little easier, because now it's not trying to find multiple sources of data. It still might have multiple directories it's provisioning to, but it has one HR source, and that's pulling in multiple downstream sources into that identity governance tool. But there are still some debates and discussion. Does your IGA tool reach out to your Active Directory, or does it just provision to Radiant over to your virtual directory and then it syncs down? You can handle some role-based stuff within your federated identity tool, where you can say, hey, I see your job code's this, I'm going to throw you in this AD group. So there's still kind of some debates internally with our team of what does what, but we kind of laid out at least some ground rules for how these two tools play together and work together. So let's talk about kind of some success, or how we actually use this. So Intermountain recently merged with a company called SCL Health, who's actually here in Denver, and got one of our cohorts here from Denver. So good to have Lexi here with us. But we merged with this healthcare company. Day one, some specific requirements: need teams to work, teams meetings, sharing documents, collaboration, access to an employee portal. We needed all these things on day one. When they announced the formal, they announced the pre-merger, but once it was approved by the FTC, and we could just roll out with it. SCL Health has about 16,000 employees that we needed to pull in, provision them M365 licenses, and get them all set up on day one so that they could log in with their SCL user ID into M365, gave them licenses, and off and going. They could log into Teams, started collaborating with them right out of the gate. Pretty good. This was way more successful than a couple smaller acquisitions we did with a few thousand employees, where we tried B2B accounts. We tried some other things, did not go well. But I think our management was extremely happy with this acquisition, what they could do, although I think they were announcing it on Monday or Tuesday. Thursday or Friday, they came and said, hey, we don't want them to get access to the employee portal. So we had a big, huge scramble to after a month of, here's what you need on day one. Oh, no, what who told you to do that? So anyway, there's always some challenges, last minute things that we have to scramble for, but pretty successful, I think, from both sides. Felt like we really were able to become a company really fairly quickly together. Makes the experience a lot better for everybody. And we've actually got quite a few kudos. Recently, my boss, the CISO, was with the CEO of the company back in Washington at some meetings, and they talked about this, and the CEO had nothing but good to say how well this day one transition went. So really good kudos for us and our team. So what's on the roadmap? We continue to modernize, and this is kind of where that continuous next comes in. The idea is just continue to iterate our growth and be able to bring in other people from our insurance systems, better third party, federations to new M&As, clinics, mature our risk base. So these are things we have. These are things we're working on that continuous modernization over the next 3 years as we grow this out, self-registration. Our services will continue to grow. We really want to move to identity as a service, be able to offer services, offer a directory service to people, developers, other services, and work with the different sources of data to bring them in and populate our directories and really, like I said, just allow these mergers and acquisitions as well as move some of the older technology out as we move into this new virtual directory. So questions, comments? Yes, go ahead.
So I'm with a healthcare organization as well. I'm with CHS, and so I get probably
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny how we all have the same problems, right?
But we all have dates, so I'm curious, in your quest for modernization, can you offer up something like what the void traps to try to avoid falling into?
It's a good question. So she asked, with the modernization program, are there things that we maybe in retrospective lessons learned?
Don't be careful not to follow this rabbit hole.
Yeah. I think there's been a couple interesting things. Definitely through the first smaller acquisitions, we learned that you probably got to move quicker in an acquisition to take over things and not continue to let them do things and to try to get them on board. From a business process, we've learned you've got to quickly decide whose policies come into play so you don't have that password debate forever. Whether you move to your third-party system, all those type of things. From a technology standpoint, I don't know, maybe I can throw that out to some of my team members here. But definitely there was lessons learned and things we do better. I think one of the challenges we had is scrambling to do this day one thing and still building out Radiant Logic at the same time, if that makes sense. So now that both of those are probably mature, not that hopefully we won't do another big acquisition or merger, but probably I think in retrospect, a couple things, had we moved some things to the cloud earlier, because usually when you do a merger acquisition, nobody's willing to open the networks because you have different security measures in place, and so that goes back to the policies, whose measures come in place. So how do you, if you're in the cloud or you have ways to get there, so now we have a lot of debate of which systems get opened up, where if they were SaaS hosted, they'd be a lot easier to get there, would have solved some of our problems. I don't think we've tackled, some of the user IDs, probably a lesson learned. What do you do with the two Bob Smiths in an acquisition that both are B. Smith, depending on what your user ID structure is. Luckily, SCL had a different one that we would never match on, but that was a big issue in some of our smaller ones. It's not only duplicate names, but duplicate email addresses and usernames. Who ends up at the end of the day with the one they wanted? So, yeah. The other thing that's interesting is, and depending on, I don't know if you've gone through acquisitions, is how many people work to move around between healthcares. And so all of a sudden, one person that, hey, they got termed 3 years ago, they went to this healthcare that now they're back.
Yeah.
So.
Network systems, so
Yeah. Yeah. And traveling nurses are surprisingly how they travel between states. You know, I guess they move as a family or whatever, and all of a sudden they show up in another state. Just things I didn't think about, you know, when we were trying to do this. So, good questions. Happy to talk to you, trade information, talk about any specific things. We are doing some, hopefully, some what I think is pretty innovative on duplicate matching, using a Lex ID and some things to try to get it better than just social and birthday that we don't get that information. So, I think I'm about out of time. Any other questions? Okay, thanks for coming. Hope you got something out of this. So, thanks a lot.